The check wasn't a gift. It was the most audacious lie in modern American history. In the warm, authoritative glow of the Oval Office, President Donald J. Trump sat behind the resolute desk, projecting the image of a magnanimous, triumphant father. He spoke directly to the American people, announcing a stunning executive order, a $2 tariff dividend for every citizen. He framed it as a populist victory, as money the countries that had ripped off America, had finally been forced to pay. It was not the government's money. He insisted it was their money, and he was simply taking it back for them. The political world instantly exploded. News anchors were left speechless, grappling with the sheer audacity of the move. Democratic leadership in Congress was thrown into a full-blown panic, with reports of furious phone calls claiming the president had just bought the election by mailing checks directly to every voter. The nation was captivated by the spectacle of the gift. Yet, in a small, fluorescent-lit office in the Rayburn House office building, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was not watching the performance. She was reading. On her desk, spread open, was the 1.200-page legislative text of the American Prosperity Act, the must-pass bill that had authorized this supposed dividend. Her chief of staff, his face pale, rushed in, holding a tablet showing the media frenzy, stammering about how they could possibly respond to a $2 giveaway. Crockett held up a hand, silencing him. She was not a panicked politician. She was a former civil rights attorney who had just smelled a lie in the prosecution's case. She had been digging for 72 hours, driven by a nagging hunch that the math didn't work. The tariff revenue numbers didn't come close to covering the cost. And then, she found it, buried deep in the technical appendices. On page 942, in a line of text she knew the lobbyists who wrote it thought no one would ever read. Her eyes widened, a cold, righteous anger rising in her chest. It wasn't a dividend at all. The bill's own language defined it as an advanced, refundable tax credit. The money wasn't from China. It was an advance on their own money. And then she saw the payback clause. The bill authorized a mandatory 10-year, 1.5% Patriot repayment surcharge on all individual income tax filings, set to begin in 2027. It wasn't a gift. It was a loan. It wasn't a dividend. It was a cynical, predatory payday loan forced upon the entire nation, financed by their own future taxes. The President of the United States had just lied to the American people, attempting to buy their votes with their own money, disguised as a populist victory. Crockett stood up, her face a mask of cold fury. She grabbed the 1.200-page bill, a stack of paper so heavy it was almost a weapon. That was her receipt. She instructed her staff to get her a podium. Not in the studio, in the hallway. Right now, the American people were being scammed, and the lie was not going to survive the night. The hallway outside the House chambers became a chaotic swirl of motion. A makeshift podium, little more than a lectern, was hastily set up, dwarfed by the grand, marble arches. A single, nervous staffer fumbled with an iPhone, trying to start a live feed. This was the arena Jasmine Crockett had chosen. Not a polished television studio. Not the grand stage of the Oval Office, with its warm lights and flags. Just a hallway, under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the Capitol building. It was a stark, almost insulting, contrast to the presidential spectacle that had unfolded just an hour earlier. A chaotic scrum of reporters, still high on the adrenaline of Trump's $2 dividend announcement, began to gather. They were confused, irritated. Why was a freshman congresswoman holding an impromptu press conference? Their phones were already blowing up with alerts from their editors. Drop everything. Focus on the dividend. Get reactions. How will the Democrats respond to this political masterstroke? They descended on Crockett, not for news, but for a reaction. Their questions were a barrage of dismissiveness, a collective assumption of her party's defeat. They shouted over one another, demanding to know how Democrats planned to counter the president's genius move. They asked if the election was, in effect, already over. They asked her to respond to the tariff dividend that was already being hailed as a populist miracle. Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, silent, her face a mask of calm, composed fury. She let the chaotic, Dismissive questions swirl around her, letting the media frenzy build to a peak. She waited, patiently, as they finished shouting. A profound, awkward silence fell. Then, she began. Her voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was cold, precise, and it cut through the noise of the hallway like a scalpel. She did not respond to their questions. She did not acknowledge the political masterstroke. She simply stated, in a low, clear tone, that she was there to correct the record. She held up the 1.200-page American Prosperity Act. She held it high for all the cameras to see, not as a prop, but as a concrete slab of evidence. She stated that the American people had just been told, by the president himself, that they were receiving a $2 dividend. They were told this money was a gift, a reward, paid for by tariffs collected from foreign countries. This, she stated, was a categorical, verifiable, and deliberate lie. A few reporters lowered their notepads, their expressions shifting from dismissal to confusion. Crockett, her eyes scanning the pack, opened the massive bill. She stated that the bill's own language, on page 41, explicitly defined the payment not as a dividend, but as an advanced, refundable tax credit. She explained, in simple, devastating terms, what this meant. It was not a gift. It was not a reward. It was not money from China. It was, she explained, simply an advance on the American people's own future tax returns. The government was not giving them $2. It was lending them $2 of their own money. A shocked murmur went through the press corps. What, did she say a loan? One reporter was heard whispering. But Crockett was just getting started. An advanced tax credit is bad enough. She continued, her voice hardening. It's a gimmick. It's dishonest. But it is not the real crime. The real crime is buried on page 942. She held up the highlighted page, her finger jabbing at a single, dense paragraph of legislative text. She stated that this section, which she knew the lobbyists who wrote it believed no one would ever read, contained the payback clause. She articulated the terms of the trap. The bill authorized the creation of a new, mandatory, 10-year tax, called, in a moment of supreme cynicism, the Patriot Repayment Surcharge. She explained that this 1.5% surcharge would be applied to all individual income tax filings for 10 straight years, beginning in 2027. She did the math for them, right there in the hallway. A family of 4, receiving $8, would be forced to pay that money back, plus interest, through this new, unavoidable tax. She looked directly into the iPhone camera that was live streaming to the world, her eyes blazing with a cold, righteous fury. This was not a dividend. This was predatory lending, on a national scale. This was not an act of populism. This was a scam. The president was not a benefactor. He was a loan shark. A profound, electric silence fell over the press corps. The cynicism was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. They were no longer political reporters covering a masterstroke. They were witnesses to the exposure of a crime. The reporters who had been shouting dismissive questions were now scrambling, their faces pale. What section did she say? Page 942? Is that real? Can someone check the bill text? Crockett calmly closed the 1.200-page bill with a soft, final thud. It was the sound of a gavel falling. She had not shouted. She had not performed. She had simply come to the podium, in a random hallway, armed with a 1.200-page receipt. And with it, she had just blown up the president's entire narrative. As she turned and walked away from the podium, the chaos erupted again. But it was no longer a media frenzy. It was a feeding frenzy. A new, far more powerful narrative, the president's payday loan scam, was screaming across the digital ether. In the Oval Office, the celebration was still underway. But the phone was about to ring, and the celebration was about to be over. The live feed from the Capitol hallway ended, but the shockwave it created was just beginning. In newsrooms across the country, a simultaneous, collective realization occurred. They had all been duped. The entire media establishment, from cable news anchors to White House correspondents, had spent the last hour breathlessly reporting on the politics of the $2 dividend. They had been so mesmerized by the performance of the Oval Office address that, just like the president's team, none of them had bothered to read the bill. Now, a freshman congresswoman, standing in a hallway with an iPhone camera, had just done their job for them, and the story was not a political masterstroke. It was a $3 trillion consumer fraud scandal. A frantic, chaotic pivot began. Anchors, who just an hour before had been praising the president's populist genius, were now staring blankly into their cameras, their producers shouting in their earpieces. Chirons, the bold text at the bottom of the screen, began to flip in real time, a dizzying correction of the narrative. What had read? Trump announces historic $2 tariff dividend. Now read. Crockett, dividend is a payday loan scam, not a tariff rebate. What had read? Dems in panic. How to counter $2,000 checks. Now read. Representative Crockett reveals bill's Patriot repayment surcharge. A10YEAR. 1.5% national tax. The entire, carefully constructed White House narrative, built on the single, powerful lie of free money, had been exposed and annihilated in less than 10 minutes. Meanwhile, in the West Wing, the celebration was still underway. Senior aides were congratulating the president. Champagne was reportedly on ice. The mood was triumphant. They had done it. They had secured the election. Then, the door to the Oval Office burst open. A junior aide, his face the color of ash, stood in the doorway, trembling. He held a tablet, his hand shaking so violently he could barely hold it steady. He couldn't speak. He just held it out. The president, annoyed at the interruption, snatched it from his hand. On the screen was the live feed from the Capitol hallway. He saw Jasmine Crockett, her face a mask of calm, cold fury, holding up his 1.200-page bill. He heard her, in her precise, prosecutorial tone, use the words, loan. He heard her read the damning text from Section 942. He heard her utter the phrase, Patriot repayment surcharge. The sound of a heavy glass slamming onto the resolute desk echoed through the Oval Office. The magnanimous father from the primetime address was gone. In his place was a man with eyes like burning coals, staring at the screen, his face a mask of purple, volcanic rage. The aides who had been laughing just moments before now flinched, scrambling to avoid his gaze. The panic in the West Wing was no longer a political panic. It was an existential one. He hadn't just been challenged. He had been exposed. His entire, triumphant, American Prosperity Act had just been reframed, correctly, as the single largest, most cynical scam in American history. And he had been exposed not by the Senate leadership, not by the New York Times, but by a freshman congresswoman he had likely never even heard of. His fury was not just at her. It was at his own staff. Who let this happen? Who wrote this bill with such a clear, traceable, and stupid payback clause? Who thought that she wouldn't read it? He had just been humiliated in front of the entire world. His gift to the American people revealed as a predatory, high-interest loan. On the other side of the city, in the offices of the Democratic leadership, the mood was undergoing its own whiplash. The despair and panic from an hour ago had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, almost giddy, disbelief. Phones were ringing off the hook. Did you see it? Is it real? Get her the 1.200-page bill. Wait. She already has it? Get her on every show. Now. The Democratic establishment, which had been preparing for a long, brutal, losing fight against the president's free money, had just been handed a silver bullet, and it had been delivered not by their seasoned, high-priced political strategists, but by a 40-something former public defender from Texas who, in a masterstroke of political brilliance, had simply decided to do the reading. The public reaction was the final, devastating blow. The initial excitement over free money had turned, almost instantly, into a bitter, cold, and personal anger. The term, Patriot repayment surcharge, became a national punchline, a symbol of Washington's ultimate cynicism. Social media exploded, not with thanks, but with calculators. People began posting their own tax returns, multiplying their income by 1.5%, and then by 10 years. They realized, with dawning horror, that the president's $2 gift was, for most working families, a loss of thousands of dollars. The president's masterstroke had become a political albatross. The gift was now a scam. The narrative was completely, irrevocably, and permanently flipped. The president, his face still a mask of fury, grabbed his phone. He did not call his chief of staff. He did not call the press secretary. He started typing, his thumbs jabbing at the screen. The counterattack was about to begin. The first counterattack did not come from the press secretary. It came directly from the president, and it was a digital roar of pure, unadulterated fury. While the media was still frantically fact-checking the term, Patriot repayment surcharge, President Trump's phone lit up. He didn't address the substance of the bill. He didn't explain the 1.5% tax. He attacked the messenger. In a series of all-caps posts on his social media platform, he unleashed a tirade of personal insults. He called Jasmine Crockett a low IQ, grandstanding Democrat, and a liar who hates the American people. He claimed she was a radical socialist who was desperate to stop me from giving you, the American people, $2. He insisted the money was coming from China, and that Crockett was a Chinese puppet trying to sabotage the greatest economic victory in American history. It was a classic Trumpian deflection, loud, aggressive, and aimed directly at his base. In any other circumstance, it would have worked. The media would have been distracted, forced to cover the fight and the name-calling. But this time, it failed, spectacularly. The narrative was no longer his to control. His attack was met not with outrage, but with mockery. The replies to his posts were a deluge of digital receipts. Users flooded his timeline with screenshots of Section 942. They posted memes of him as a predatory payday lender. The top-rated reply, with over 100,000 likes, was simple. The bill is 1.200 pages. She read it. You didn't. Sit down. Jasmine Crockett, in a masterstroke of strategic silence, did not respond. She didn't have to. She let the president's unhinged, all-caps meltdown contrast with her own calm, factual, and devastatingly precise presentation. He looked panicked. She looked professional. He looked like a liar. She looked like a truth-teller. The real panic, however, was taking place behind the scenes on Capitol Hill. The Republican leadership was in a state of absolute four-alarm terror. Their genius election-winning policy had been exposed in less than an hour as a massive, cynical, middle-class tax hike. He's giving them $2 and then taking back $3 over the next decade. One moderate Republican was overheard shouting into his phone. This isn't a dividend. It's a political suicide pact. I have to go back to my district and vote on this. The Democratic leadership, who had been in a state of despair just an hour before, was now giddy with a bloodthirsty euphoria. They had been handed the single greatest political weapon of the entire election cycle. But Jasmine Crockett was not a politician who was satisfied with just winning the news cycle. She was a trial lawyer. She was not going to let him off the hook. That evening, she went on national television. The anchor, her face a mask of serious concern, asked, "Congresswoman, the president has attacked you, calling you a liar and a Chinese puppet. Your response?" Crockett smiled, a calm, almost pitying smile. "The president is clearly upset, and he has a right to his feelings," she said, a line so condescendingly polite it was brutal. "But his feelings cannot change the facts. The facts are on page 942 of his own bill. The Patriot repayment surcharge is a 1.5% tax on the American people. He can call me whatever names he wants, but he cannot change the text of the bill he is asking Congress to pass." Then, she laid the trap. "But I believe the president," she continued, her voice a model of sincerity. "I believe he wants to give the American people $2. I believe he wants it to be a real dividend, not a scam. So, tomorrow, I will be introducing an amendment on the floor of the House." The anchor leaned in. "An amendment?" "A very simple one," Crockett said. "My amendment will do two things. First, it will completely repeal the 1.5% Patriot repayment surcharge. It will wipe the tax off the books. So the $2 is a real gift, just as the president promised. But Congresswoman, the anchor asked, how will you pay for it? Crockett's smile remained. That's the second part of my amendment. We will pay for this $2 dividend for the American people by repealing the $2.1 trillion in permanent corporate tax cuts from 2017. The anchor was left speechless. The trap was set. Crockett had just created an impossible choice for the entire Republican Party. They could either vote against her amendment, thereby publicly voting for a 10-year tax hike on their own constituents. Or, they could vote for her amendment, and vote to repeal the signature legislative achievement of the Trump presidency. It was checkmate, and the vote was scheduled for the following day. The following morning, the atmosphere on the floor of the House of Representatives was not just tense, it was toxic. The C-SPAN cameras, which normally show a half-empty chamber, were panning across a packed house. Every member was in their seat. The press gallery was overflowing. The entire nation was watching to see what would happen. Jasmine Crockett, in a procedural move, formally introduced her amendment to strike Section 942, the Patriot Repayment Surcharge, and to offset the cost by repealing the 2017 corporate tax cuts. The Republican leadership was in a full-blown, four-alarm panic. They were completely, totally, and publicly trapped. Crockett had just forced them into the ultimate political nightmare. If they voted yes on her amendment, they would be voting to repeal President Trump's signature multi-trillion-dollar tax cuts, an act of open rebellion that would earn them a one-way ticket to a brutal primary challenge. If they voted no on her amendment, they would be voting against repealing the Patriot Repayment Surcharge. They would be casting a public, recorded vote in favor of a new 1.5% national tax hike on every single one of their constituents for the next 10 years. Both options were political suicide. They were trapped. They could not vote on the substance. So, they did what the Washington machine always does when it's cornered by the truth. They tried to hide. The House Majority Leader, his face a grim mask of frustration, strode to the microphone. He did not move to debate the amendment. He made a different motion. Mr. Speaker, he shouted over the din, I move to table the gentlewoman's amendment. A murmur of outrage and understanding swept the chamber. A motion to table is the ultimate procedural trick. It is the coward's vote. It's a vote to kill a bill without ever actually voting yes or no on its contents. It's a procedural vote to make the problem disappear. The speaker immediately recognized the motion. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute to speak against the motion to table. This was it. 1 minute, 60 seconds to explain to the American people what was really happening. Jasmine Crockett walked to the podium, her steps deliberate, her face a mask of cold, righteous anger. She looked not at the Republicans, but directly into the main C-SPAN camera. Mr. Speaker, she began, her voice ringing through the silent chamber. The leadership of the other party has just made a motion to table my amendment. I want to be very, very clear with the American people about what that means. It means they are too cowardly to take a vote. Shouts of, out of order, erupted from the Republican side. But she pressed on, her voice rising. They are too afraid to go on the record. A yes vote means they support the 1.5% Patriot Repayment Surcharge on their own constituents. A no vote means they repeal the president's tax cuts. They are trapped by their own scam. And so now, they are trying to hide from you. The chamber was in an uproar. Do not let them fool you, she thundered. A vote to table is a vote to hide. It is a vote in favor of this new tax. It is a vote to kill the dividend and keep the tax. It is a vote to protect corporations and scam the American people. I urge my colleagues, do not be cowards. Vote no on the motion to table, and let's have a real, up or down vote on whether you support a 10-year tax hike on the middle class. The gavel came down. Her minute was over. The electronic vote began. For a few agonizing minutes, the board lit up. Green, green, green on the Democratic side. Red, red, red on the Republican side. In the end, the motion to table passed by a slim, party line vote. The Republican leadership let out a quiet, relieved breath. They had done it. They had won. The amendment was dead. The 1.5% Patriot repayment surcharge was still in the bill. But as they filed out of the chamber, they saw the breaking news alerts on their phones and their faces went pale. The headline was not, "Crockett's Amendment Fails." The headline, on every single news network, was, "House Republicans Vote to Protect New 1.5% Patriot Tax Hike." Crockett had not just set a trap. She had set a second trap under the first one. She knew they would table the amendment, and she had used her 60 seconds to define what that procedural vote meant. She had successfully, and brilliantly, reframed a procedural win for the GOP as a cowardly vote to raise your taxes. The political damage was catastrophic. The president, watching from the Oval Office, was reportedly apoplectic. His dividend was now officially a tax hike. The scam was complete, and his own party, in a desperate attempt to save him, had just made it 1,000,000 times worse. The political firestorm that Jasmine Crockett had ignited was no longer just a Washington story, it was a Main Street inferno. The morning after the coward's vote, every local newspaper and morning show in America ran with the same devastating headline: House Republicans Vote to Protect New 1.5% Tax Hike on Middle Class. It was a catastrophic, self-inflicted wound. Crockett's brilliant 60-second reframing of the motion to table had been 100% successful. There was no nuance left. There was no procedural explanation. In the minds of the American people, the Republican Party had just, in broad daylight, voted to raise their taxes for 10 years to pay for a scam. The panic that rippled through the Republican conference was unlike anything the Capitol had seen. Members from swing districts, the moderates, who were already facing tough re-election battles, were in a state of open revolt. Their district offices were being flooded with tens of thousands of furious calls. Their social media pages were a toxic wasteland of voters posting screenshots of their tax returns, their pay stubs, and that single, damning line from Section 942. How could this happen? One Republican congressman from a vital swing state was overheard screaming at a leadership aide in a Capitol hallway. "You told us this was a gift. You just made me walk the plank for a tax hike. My opponent is already running ads with my vote on it. This is political suicide." The Democratic Party, which had been in disarray just 48 hours earlier, now moved as a single, lethal entity. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, DCCC, immediately launched a multi-million-dollar ad buy, targeting every single vulnerable Republican who had voted to table the amendment. The ads were simple, brutal, and effective. They showed a smiling picture of the Republican member, followed by the text of Crockett's amendment, and then the final, bloody red text: "They voted to raise your taxes to pay for a scam." But the true implosion was happening in the White House. President Donald J. Trump, who had started the week on the precipice of his greatest political victory, was now watching his signature populist achievement, his tariff dividend, become the single most toxic political issue in the country. He had been exposed, and he was livid. But his fury was not just reserved for Jasmine Crockett. It was now aimed, with volcanic force, at his own party. In his mind, they had failed him. They were weak. They were stupid. They had let a freshman with a big mouth outmaneuver the entire Republican leadership. He had given them a political masterstroke, and they had, with their procedural incompetence, turned it into a disaster. He began making furious calls to the House leadership. He berated the majority leader for not knowing how to count votes. He tore into the speaker for looking like a weak, scared child on live television. And then, in a move that sealed their fate, he went public. He took to his social media platform, not to attack Crockett this time, but to attack his own party. Our weak and ineffective Republican leadership in the House let the radical Democrats, led by a low IQ Congresswoman, define our great tariff dividend. He posted, "They should have had an easy vote, but they are stupid and don't know how to fight. They let her set a trap, and like fools, they walked right into it." Sad. This was the ultimate betrayal. He had just thrown his entire congressional leadership under the bus, in public, in the middle of the crisis. The Republican Party was now in a full-blown, chaotic civil war. The moderates were terrified of their voters, and the leadership was being eviscerated by their own president. The American Prosperity Act, the 1.200-page bill containing the $2 dividend, was now politically radioactive. It was dead, and everyone knew it. The Republican speaker, his career in tatters, had only one move left. He had to kill the bill. He had to publicly execute the president's signature policy, the very policy that was supposed to guarantee their re-election. In a hushed and humiliated press conference, the speaker announced that, in light of the Democrats' deliberate and dishonest campaign of misinformation, the leadership was temporarily pulling the American Prosperity Act from the floor schedule to make technical corrections. The press corps erupted. Is the 1.5% tax a technical correction? Mr. Speaker, are you pulling the bill because Crockett was right? The president called you stupid. Sir, do you have a response? He didn't answer. He turned and walked away from the podium. A broken man. In her small office, Jasmine Crockett watched the press conference on her laptop. She took no pleasure in it. She simply watched the man who had, 72 hours ago, stood on the pinnacle of American power, now publicly defeated. Her chief of staff walked in, holding a printout of the breaking news. It's over, he whispered, his voice full of awe. You did it. You killed the bill. You won. Crockett closed her laptop. Her face was calm, but her eyes were already focused on the next fight. We didn't win, she said. We just stopped a scam. Now the real work begins. We still have to repeal those corporate tax cuts. The American Prosperity Act was dead. The tariff dividend was now a national punchline, a toxic symbol of the most cynical political scam in modern history. The Republican speaker, humiliated by his own president and checkmated by a freshman congresswoman, was a dead man walking, a ghost haunting the speaker's lobby, his authority completely, totally, and irrevocably gone. The entire political landscape had been upended, and it was all because one woman, Jasmine Crockett, had bothered to read the bill. But folks, if you thought the fight was over, you haven't been paying attention, because stopping the new scam was only half the battle. Now, it was time to go after the original one. The White House was in a state of apoplectic, volcanic rage. The president, having seen his signature, election-winning gift blown to pieces, was now in full-blown attack mode. He was done blaming his stupid and weak Republican leadership. He now turned his full, undivided fury on the person who had pulled the thread and unraveled his entire plan, Jasmine Crockett. He went on a 12-post tirade on social media. He called her a radical left liar. He claimed she had sabotaged the greatest gift ever given to the American people. He told his followers, she wants you to be poor. She wants to stop you from getting $2. The media, of course, rushed straight to her office. A massive scrum of cameras and microphones blocking the hallway. All of them expecting a fiery, defensive response. They were expecting a fight. But Jasmine Crockett didn't give them a fight. She gave them a prosecution. She didn't do another hallway interview. She booked herself on the biggest Sunday morning political show. She sat down, calm, poised, and utterly in command. The host, a seasoned veteran, led with the obvious, Congresswoman, the president has accused you, by name, of sabotaging a $2 payment to every American. He says you want people to be poor. Your response? Crockett smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator who has its prey exactly where it wants it. The president, she began, her voice a calm, steady blade, is understandably upset. He is upset because we exposed his Patriot repayment surcharge for what it was, a 10-year, 1.5% tax hike on the middle class. We didn't sabotage a gift. We stopped a scam, and I believe the American people, who are smart enough to read their own tax returns, are grateful for that. She had dismissed his entire line of attack in 30 seconds. Then, she pivoted. But I'm not here to talk about the dividend anymore. That bill is dead, as it should be. I'm here to talk about what that fight revealed. I'm here to talk about the real crime. The one that is still happening right now. The host was confused. The real crime? What are you? Crockett looked directly into the camera, speaking not to the host, but to the millions of Americans watching at home. When I introduced my amendment, she said, it had two parts. The first part, which everyone knows, was to kill the 1.5% tax scam. But the second part was the most important. It was to pay for the $2 dividend by repealing the $2.1 trillion in permanent, reckless, and obscene corporate tax cuts that were passed in 2017. She leaned forward, and that is the part that made the Republican Party vote like cowards. They were not voting to protect you from a tax hike. They were voting to protect their donors from a tax hike. They would rather tax you for 10 years than ask a single corporation that's paying $0 in taxes to finally pay its fair share. She had done it. She had taken the entire national narrative, Trump's $2 dividend, and had successfully, brilliantly, pivoted it into a national referendum on the 2017 corporate tax cuts. So, today, she announced, I am introducing a new, standalone bill. It's called the Corporate Fair Share Act, and it does exactly what my amendment proposed to do. It repeals the most corrupt, giveaway tax cuts for the wealthiest corporations, and it redirects that $2.1 trillion, not into a one-time gimmick, but into permanently funding the child tax credit, into securing Social Security, and into paying down our national debt. She looked back at the host, who was sitting there, stunned. The American people have seen the scam. Now, I'm going to make Congress vote on the real crime. The American Prosperity Act is dead, but the fight to end the corporate welfare that created it has only just begun. The political world was, once again, completely upended. The president's attack on her was now irrelevant. The conversation was no longer about his failed dividend. The entire national conversation, the one that would now dominate the news cycle all the way to the midterm elections, was about her new bill, and the deeply unpopular corporate tax cuts she had just, in a moment of political genius, dragged back into the center of the spotlight. The trap she had set was not a single-day event. It was a long-term prosecution of the entire Republican economic agenda. The confrontation that began with a seemingly triumphant Oval Office address and ended with the complete collapse of a signature policy and a party in disarray will be studied for decades. It was a masterclass, not just in political communication, but in the strategic dismantling of a powerful narrative. What Jasmine Crockett accomplished was not a lucky shot, it was a clinical, multi-stage prosecution. Let's break down the playbook, because this is a lesson in how to defeat a political giant. First, Crockett refused to engage on the opponent's terrain. The entire media, the public, and the Democratic Party were trapped in Trump's frame. How do you fight free money? They were debating the politics of the dividend. Crockett understood that to fight on his terms was to lose. She ignored the performance and went, with a lawyer's precision, to the primary source, the 1.200-page bill. She did not debate the idea of the dividend, she exposed the lie of its mechanism. She did not attack the gift, she exposed the scam. Second, she weaponized simplicity and clarity. Trump's power came from a simple, powerful, emotional idea. I am giving you $2. Crockett defeated it with an even simpler, more powerful fact. He is making you pay it back with a 1.5% tax. She then created her own, equally simple narrative, the Patriot Repayment Surcharge. The name was a masterstroke of political branding. It was cynical, it was sticky, and it was true. She did not try to debate complex economic theory, she held up a receipt. In the age of spin, the person with the clearest, most undeniable fact wins. Third, she set a sequential trap. This was the true genius of her operation. Trap 1. The hallway press conference. This exposed the lie and forced the media to correct the record, framing the president as dishonest. Trap 2. The amendment. This was the checkmate. She created a no-win scenario for the entire Republican Party. By forcing them to vote on her amendment, she gave them two choices, both of which were political suicide. Either vote for a massive corporate tax repeal, enraging their donors, or vote against repealing the Patriot Surcharge, enraging their voters. Trap 3. The motion to table. She knew they would try to escape with a procedural vote, so she used her 60 seconds to define that vote for the American people, successfully and accurately framing the motion to table as a coward's vote to raise your taxes. Finally, she pivoted from defense to offense. After killing the bill and fracturing the Republican Party, she did not take a victory lap. She immediately used her newfound platform to launch a new war. This time against the real crime, the 2017 corporate tax cuts. She didn't just win the news cycle, she seized it and used it to set the entire legislative agenda for the coming months. This, folks, is what real power looks like. It's not about the loudest voice or the biggest stage. It's about preparation, it's about precision, and it's about having the courage to read the fine print while everyone else is distracted by the show. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a political fight, she provided a blueprint for how to hold power accountable. And that, my friends, is a receipt we can all take to the bank.